Hello everyone, the Empire. That whispered that night, the first person who heard it thought he was dying. It was winter in the mountains. The kind of cold that doesn't simply sit on your skin but slips into your lungs and lives there. Elias Ward had been walking for 3 days across a forgotten valley where maps disagreed with the earth. The last village he passed had no name on its signboard, only a date carved into the wood, one smoothed by centuries of hands. 1624. He didn't notice. The cinema at first. Not the absence of birds. Not the absence of insects. Not even the absence of wind. He noticed the voice. It didn't come from ahead, behind, or above. It came from the ground. A whisper, not in a language, not in a sound he could repeat, but in a feeling so precise it bypassed his ears entirely. Allié and pressed directly into his thoughts. "You are late?" Elias stopped walking. Snow creaked under his boots, loud enough to make him flinch. His breath clouded in front of him and lingered longer than it should have, as if the air itself didn't want to let go. Then the valley answered again. We waited, Dot. He should have turned back. Every instinct learned from years of field archaeology. Toem. He had crossed a line, not political, not geographic, but chronological. Places like this exist in rumors among researchers. Valleys where ruins don't erode properly. Forests where tree rings refuse to match history. Stone roads that appear on satellite images one year and disappear the next. But Elias Ward had spent his career chasing stories no one else believed, and this valley had been calling to him for months. The locals had warned him. Though none admitted, they knew why. Night comes faster there. One man told him without meeting his eyes. An old woman pressed a coin into his hand before he left the last village. It wasn't local currency, it was older, impossibly old. The face stamped onto it had been scratched away deliberately. "Don't listen if it speaks," she said. He had smiled politely. Now he stood alone in the center of a valley that did not exist on any official survey map. While something older than language recognized his arrival, the ground sloped downward, until the snow thinned and the earth beneath revealed stone. Not natural stone. Laid stone, perfectly aligned slabs forming a road buried beneath centuries of soil, uncovered only here, as if the valley itself had chosen to show him. He knelt no chisel marks, no weather erosion. Patterns consistent with known civilizations and warm. The stone was warmed. Elias pulled off his glove and pressed, his palm flat against the surface. The whisper surged instantly, no longer distant, now surrounding him from every direction. "You remember." His vision blurred. Not darkness. Memory, but not his memory. Torchlight flickering along the same road. Banners rising where snow now fell. Thousands of footsteps marching in disciplined rhythm. Not a battle march, a procession. And at the center of it all, silence. Not imposed silence. Reverent silence. An empire where sound itself obeyed. Elias tore his hand away and stumbled backward into the snow, heart pounding violently against his ribs. The valley was quiet again, but he understood something impossible. This place had not been abandoned. It had been paused. Night arrived too quickly. The sun touched the mountains and vanished as if pulled downward by unseen hands. No twilight, no gradual dimming. One moment gold, the next indigo, and then the stars appeared. Too many stars. They crowded the sky in impossible density, forming faint geometric lines like a blueprint drawn across the heavens. Elias recognized constellations, but they were rearranged. Familiar patterns shifted slightly, as if observed from a different century. or a different calendar. He lit a small camp lantern beside the ancient road. The whisper returned immediately, stronger now, not words intent. "Stay." His lantern, click-cut, flickered violently, then stabilized into a steady, unnatural glow. The flame no longer moved in the air, because the air had stopped moving. The cold vanished. The valley exhaled. Snow melted in perfect circles across the stone road, revealing carvings that hadn't been visible before, thousands of shallow lines, etched so delicately they could not have been made by hand tools. They formed the writing, but the writing changed as he looked at it, not physically changing. His perception changed. His mind translated patterns into meaning faster than logic could resist. He was not reading symbols. He was remembering them. That empire had no name. Names divide. Names age. Names died out, so they built a civilization without one. They called themselves simply the continuance, not a nation, not a people, but a state of existence. Their cities were constructed according to acoustic mathematics, every wall angled to guide sound, every street measured to carry whispers across miles. They did not shout commands. They spoke gently, and the empire obeyed. Children were taught silence before speech. Leaders were chosen not by power but by resonance. The person whose voice could travel the furthest without raising volume. They discovered something modern physics would struggle to accept. Sound remembers not every spoken. Word leaves an imprint in matter, a vibration that never fully disappears. Over centuries, they learned to layer these vibrations intentionally, embedding instructions into the architecture itself. A building could guide behavior. A city could influence thought. An empire could govern without soldiers. Elias felt tears on his face and didn't know why, because he was not learning history. He was being synchronized with it. Then came the problem they could not solve. Time listens to. The more precisely they shaped sound, the more reality aligned around expectation. Crops grew where they sang them to grow. Illness faded when harmonics corrected imbalance in the body. Even aging slowed within certain chambers, built for perfect resonance. They had not conquered death, but they had postponed it. For generations. And postponement creates imbalance. The earth beneath their capital began to hum at night, not their controlled harmonics, but something deeper responding to centuries of stored intention. They realized they had not only preserved voices, they had accumulated them. Millions of human thoughts layered into stone until the planet itself began answering. They feared what would happen if it woke fully, so they did the only thing left. They stopped. Not collapse, not destruction. Silence. They synchronized every citizen, every voice, every structure into one final harmonic, a note designed to pause continuity itself. Civilization placed into suspension, not waiting for a listener compatible. Enough to safely release the echo. Elias fell to his knees. "I didn't come to wake you," he whispered aloud, voice shaking. Diavali responded instantly. "You already did." The star shifted, not moving, aligning. The road beneath him vibrated softly, not shaking but breathing. From the far end of the valley, structures began emerging from beneath the earth, not rising violently but phasing into presence. Like memory returning to awareness, columns appeared where there had been empty air seconds ago. Terraces formed along slopes that moments earlier held untouched snow, an entire city resolving from silence. He realized the truth with terror, tightening his chest. The Empire had never been buried. It had been stored in sound, and he had just provided the final variable, an external mind capable of hearing it. Footsteps approached. Not echoes. Relay. Figures stood at the end of the newly revealed roadhuman, in shape but impossibly still, as if motion required permission. Their voice entered his mind without passing through air. "You are the first in 1,403 years. Elias couldn't stand, couldn't run, could barely breathe. Why me? A pause, not hesitation, but consideration of how to translate an answer across centuries. Because you listen without expecting a reply. He thought of his life, decades spent studying ruins, speaking to the dead through fragments, while never quite belonging among the living. He had trained his mind to hear what others dismissed, and something had been waiting for exactly that. The figure stepped closer. Not ancient, not modern. Timeless in the uncomfortable way statues feel alive when observed too long. "We cannot resume alone," the presence said gently. A closed echo collapses. "We require a witness from a later age to anchor continuity." Elias understood. If the Empire returned fully, it would not emerge into its own time. It would emerge into his, far beyond the valley. Unseen cities slept, unaware that history was deciding whether to restart. He looked at the rising structures, the silent streets forming around him, the civilization that governed without violence and feared its own perfection. "Will you rule us?" he asked. The answer came with something like sadness. "We never ruled. We guided. And if you come back..." A longer silence. "Your world is loud. Ours shapes loudness. The outcome depends on whether your age wishes to be commanded or harmonized," thought Elias. Realized the choice was not theirs. It was his. Because he was the bridge, the final listener. The Empire that whispered at night was ready to speak again. And the modern world had no idea it had just been given a chance to either become quieter or disappear into a single, perfectly obedient note. He closed his eyes as the city fully formed around him and the stars aligned into a geometry unseen for over a millennium. "Then teach me," he said, and the earth began to sing. The ground did not tremble, it tuned. At first Elias thought the sensation was in his feet, a faint vibration like standing near distant machinery, but then he realized the rhythm matched his pulse. The valley wasn't shaking the earth, it was synchronizing with him. The figure before him raised a hand, not a commanding gesture, an invitation that Stan heeded, though he couldn't remember deciding to move. The city behind the figure sharpened into detail as if reality had been slowly adjusting its focus. Structures, once blurred, now held edges, terraces layered with impossible symmetry, narrow channels cut along streets not for water but for air, guiding invisible currents through the architecture. Wind moved again, but only along specific paths. Elias heard it whisper through the channels, each turn altering the pitch. The entire city was an instrument, and night was its musician. "You lived inside music," he said quietly. "We lived inside agreement," the figure replied. They began walking. No guards, no gates, no sign of abandonment. Stone surfaces bore no cracks, no moss, no erosion, not preserved, but paused, as if time had been gently folded around the place and tied off. He noticed shadows first. There were none that didn't belong. Every structure blocked starlight in deliberate angles, forming patterns across the straits. When his foot crossed one of the darker shapes, the air warmed slightly. Another cooled it again. Temperature control. He murmured, comfort alignment. Came the correction. They entered a circular plaza that its center stood a basin carved into the ground, empty, yet he heard water. Not imagination. Not memory. The unmistakable sound of a slow ripple. The figure gestured toward it. Elias leaned over. The basin held no liquid. It held reflections, not reflections of the sky, reflections. Give of moments. A woman laughing beneath hanging lanterns. Children tracing lines in sand that glowed faintly where their fingers passed. A gathering of thousands seated in silence, eyes closed, breathing together. A living archive. You stored memory in resonance. He whispered, not stored. The figure corrected softly. Maintained that Elias watched a child run through the plaza, barefoot across the stone, except the child wasn't there. The image passed through him like cool mist. They are not ghosts, he said slowly. They are continuity without matter. He straightened, heart racing. You didn't just pause yourselves. You converted existence. The figure's expression, creed, if it had one, carried something like relief. You understand faster than the last one? Elias froze. The last one. The air shifted. For the first time since entering the valley, the harmonic perfection wavered. Every era produces listeners. The figure said. Not many, not often, but enough that we hoped. He felt cold return briefly. What happened to them? A pause long enough to measure fear. They refused to remain. A distant tone pulsed beneath the ground deeper than before. Older than the city, the basins. Reflections flickered. They woke you, then left, Elias asked. They woke part of us, the figure replied. Then their world rejected the change. Continuity requires acceptance from both sides. Without it, resonance fractures. The ground beneath the plaza hummed in dissonance for a moment. A low ache that pressed behind his eyes. They caused damage, unintentionally. They heard wonder but carried certainty. Your age builds explanations before listening fully. Elias almost laughed. That sounds accurate. They moved again, deeper into the city. Buildings here narrowed, walls rising higher and closer. The air thickened, not hard to breathe, but heavy with presence. Every footstep produced tone rather than echo. His boots struck stone and answered with notes tuned to the same scale as the wind-ash channels. He realized something disturbing. The city was listening back, not metaphorically, actively, as they passed an archway. A faint chime followed his exhale. Another matched his heartbeat. The architecture wasn't merely reacting to sound, it was measuring him, judging compatibility. He asked. Balancing interaction, the figure said. You are becoming audible to it, to the city, to the accumulated intention of those who lived here. They reached a stairway descending into darkness. No torches, no torch's light source. Yet a dim glow rose from below. Not bright, not directional. More like visibility itself increased. Elias hesitated. Is this where you ended? This is where we began stopping. He followed. The chamber beneath was enormous. Carved not outward but inward, a perfect sphere hollowed from stone larger than any cathedral he'd ever seen. The walls were smooth, etched with lines so fine they looked like frost. And the sound, he heard everything at once. Not noise. Conversations layered across centuries. Whispers overlapping but never clashing. Millions of voices forming a soft ocean of human presence. He dropped to his knees, hands over his ears. It didn't help because the sound wasn't entering through them. It was occurring inside his awareness. "What is this?" He gasped the gathered moment. The figure answered gently. "Every thought intentionally shared by our people before suspension." His breath shook. "This is everyone." Yes, at the center of the sphere hovered a ring of air that bent starlight into a slow spiral. No material held it yet rotated with perfect steadiness. "Our final harmonic anchor," the figure said. "We held existence here, so time outside could continue unharmed." Elias stared, mind struggling to grasp the scale. "You didn't freeze yourselves to survive. No, you froze yourselves to protect the future." The spiral pulsed faintly brighter. For the first time, he felt emotion from the presence beside him, not pride, not sorrow, not hope, not a second. Voice spoke, not from the figure, not from the sphere. Elias's breath stopped. The millions of whispers merged into a single tone, gentle, but immense. "You're aware?" he asked. "We remain connected. Why wake now?" A warmth surrounded him like a shared memory. "Because your era grows louder than stability allows. We were created as a correction, not rulers." Images flooded his thought cities, blazing with light visible from orbit, constant streams of voices across invisible networks, billions speaking simultaneously yet hearing less. They had waited for a time when humanity might need quiet again. "You think we'll destroy ourselves with noise," he said. "Not noise alone. Disconnection." He swallowed. "And you fix that by returning, by teaching listening." The spiral brightened further, but beneath it he sensed strain, a tension in the harmonic ocean. It's like a structure supporting too much weight. "You're fading," he realized. The figure beside him lowered its head slightly. "Suspension cannot last indefinitely without renewal. Either we rejoin continuity or dissolve completely. And you need me to anchor the transition." "Yes." His heart pounded. "What happens to me?" The voice is soft. "You would not end. You would extend, partly individual, partly shared." He laughed weakly. "So I become a citizen of a 1,000-year-old idea. You become the bridge between eras." Elias looked around the sphere at humanity preserved not in bodies but in tension, waiting centuries without decay. All of history balanced on a decision made by one exhausted archaeologist who had simply wanted to understand the past. "What if I refuse?" He asked quietly. The spiral dimmed slightly. "Then we thank you for listening," and release, and disappear. Silence held the chamber. He thought of modern cities, endless signals, arguments louder than understanding, knowledge faster than wisdom. He thought of a civilization that solved conflict by learning to hear before speaking. Then he thought of choice, humanity's stubborn, messy freedom. "If I help you," he said slowly, "you can't control us. We cannot control those who truly listen." "That's not an answer." The voices warmed, almost amused. "Then hear this one clearly. We will only exist where welcomed. Resistance breaks resonance. We learned that long ago." He exhaled. "So you're offering guidance, not dominance." Exactly. The spiral pulsed brighter again. Time was running out. Elias stepped forward. The air around the anchor hummed at a pitch that felt like standing inside a memory he hadn't lived yet. "Tell me what to do." The figure moved beside him, closer now, almost human. "Speak honestly." "That's it. The harmonic requires truth from the bridging mind, not perfection, not certainty. only sincerity without self-deception. He closed his eyes. All his life he'd studied voices of the dead, trying to reconstruct intentions from fragments. Now millions listened to him. He had never felt less prepared. "I don't know if humanity's ready," he admitted. "We build faster than we understand. We argue more than we hear. But we keep trying. And sometimes, rarely, we actually listen." The Spyro steadied. He felt it respond, aligning to his heartbeat again. "I can't promise we won't misuse what you teach," he continued. "But hiding wisdom because it might be abused hasn't worked either." The chamber brightened softly. "I think," he said, voice trembling, "we deserve the chance to learn, not to be fixed." The harmonic ocean surged not louder but deeper, like agreement spreading across centuries. "Then continuity may resume." The voices said together. The figure placed a hand over his chest. Warmth flooded him, not entering, but matching him. "Hold identity," it whispered. "Do not surrender it. Shed it." The spiral expanded. Stone walls vibrated gently as if breathing after a millennium underwater. Outside, the city began to glow, and far beyond the valley, across mountains and sleeping towns, people stirred without knowing why, pausing, mid-bream as a feeling they couldn't name, brushed to their thoughts. Not a command, not an invitation to listen. Elias stood at the center of the oldest silence on earth as it prepared to end, and the empire that whispered at night took its first breath in over 1,000 years. Gah! The first change did not happen in the valley. It happened 3,000 miles away, in a Brooklyn apartment where a woman named Marisol Vega had fallen asleep with the television on, volume low enough to blur into background static. She woke at 2:17 a.m. with the strange sensation that someone had called her name not aloud. Not urgently, just gently. She sat up. The TV screen flickered, though the program had ended hours ago. For a brief second, the static resolved into lines. It feigned geometric alignments, like constellations bending into structure. Then it was gone. But the quiet in her apartment felt intentional. She muted the television. And for the first time in years, she noticed the hum of her refrigerator, the distant traffic, her own breathing. None of it felt intrusive. It felt arranged. She didn't know that across the country, in Arizona, a night shift truck driver pulled over because the desert air seemed to carry a tone too deep to be wind. Or that in Chicago, a music professor jolted awake with a melody in his mind so precise he ran to his piano before it could fade. Or that satellites orbiting Earth recorded a microsecond fluctuation in atmospheric vibration too subtle to trigger alarms, but measurable. The valley glowed brighter. Elias felt the ripples spread outward like a stone dropped into still water, except the water was the planet itself. The spiral anchor no longer strained. It rotated smoothly, drawing care from him, not energy, but coherence. He remained himself, his thoughts his own, yet beneath them ran a second awareness, vast and calm. He could sense the empire stretching, not physically expanding across geographies, re-emerging as pattern. The figure beside him, less translucent now, watched the chamber walls pulse with renewed strength. "It stabilizes," it said. Elias swallowed hard. "You're connecting to people, to those receptive to alignment. Random, never random, Gate. Resonance is selective by nature." He understood with a mixture of awe and fear. They weren't broadcasting like a signal. They were harmonizing with those already inclined to listen. Artists, children, the lonely, the thoughtful, anyone whose mind occasionally grew quiet enough to notice something beneath the noise. The chamber brightened further. But then a fracture. A sharp dissonance tore through the sphere like a crack in glass. Elias staggered. "What was that?" The voices. "Faltered resistance," they answered. Another pulse, harsher this time. Images flashed in his mind. Control rooms filled with monitors. Analysts staring at anomalies in data streams. Defense networks flagging unexplained atmospheric patterns. Human systems designed to detect threat were noticing harmony and interpreting it as intrusion. "They think you're interference," he said. "We anticipated caution." A third shock hit stronger. This one wasn't technological. It was emotional. Billions of restless minds brushing against something unfamiliar and recoiling instinctively. Fear spreads faster than understanding. "You're too sudden," Elias realized. "We're wired to distrust what we don't control." The figure turned toward him sharply. "Then you must anchor harder." "How?" "Remain fully present. More distinctly, you maintain individual identities lest we appear as invasion." The spiral wavered again. Outside, the city flickered at its edges. He felt the Empire's uncertainty. Not fear, but instability. The last listener had failed. Because he tried to dissolve into them. Elias did the opposite. He thought of his childhood in Ohio, the smell of wet earth after summer storms, his mother's laugh, the ache of losing his father too early, the stubborn independence that drove him into archaeology despite everyone advising safer careers. He focused on every imperfection that made him undeniably singular. "I am Elias Ward," he said aloud, voice steady. "I'm not surrendering. I'm collaborating." The chamber steadied. The spiral's rotation regained smoothness. "Yes," the voices whispered. "Distinctness strengthens harmony." Another ripple moved outward, softer this time, more gradual. Instead of a surge, it felt like sunrise. Across the world, people didn't wake abruptly. They simply lingered a moment longer in silence before speaking. Catumans paused mid-sentence, as if both sides suddenly recognized the shape of the other's thought. A violinist in Boston adjusted her bow pressure instinctively, discovering a warmer tone. A software engineer in Seattle caught himself before typing an angry response and instead deleted it. Tiny shifts, almost invisible, but measurable. In Washington, D.C., inside a secure facility built to monitor anomalies, screens filled with atmospheric models recalibrating unexpectedly. No solar flare," one analyst muttered. "Not seismic either. What is it then?" A senior physicist leaned closer to the data stream. "It's coherence," she said slowly. "Coherence of what?" She didn't answer immediately. Because she didn't know how to phrase it without sounding irrational. Global background vibration levels were aligning. Not rising. Aligning. As if the planet itself were tuning. Back in the valley, Elias felt exhaustion creeping into his limbs. "How long does this take?" he asked. "Transition occurs gradually," the figure said. "If rushed, fracture increases. And if we go too slow, we fade before integration completes." He laughed breathlessly. "So, no pressure." The figure almost smiled. "Your humor stabilizes you. Keep it." He sat at the edge of the sphere, staring into the spiral. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "If you succeed, do you return?" "Physically." A pause. "Not as before. Matter is heavy. We learn to exist more lightly. You'll be influence, presence without domination. And if humanity rejects you entirely, then we dissolve peacefully. Our intention remains imprinted in matter regardless." He nodded. They weren't desperate. They were offering. Another dissonant pulse hit, weaker than before. The world's key. Fear was adjusting, recalibrating from panic to curiosity. Curiosity was safer. He sensed something else now. Questions forming in minds far away. Scientists intrigued rather than alarmed. Musicians experimenting with new tonal structures. Social media posts asking, "Does anyone else feel different tonight?" Key. Not hysteria, wonder. The Empire strengthened then. The unexpected happened. A child heard them clearly. In rural Montana, an 8-year-old boy sitting awake in bed whispered into the darkness, "Hello!" The spiral flared brilliantly. Elias gasped. What was that? Pure reception. The voices answered with unmistakable warmth. Children had always been the most receptive, uncluttered by rigid frameworks. The boy didn't feel threatened. He felt accompanied. His whisper traveled effortlessly into the harmonic network. "Are you lonely?" the child asked the darkness. The chamber filled with something Elias had not felt from the Empire before. "Joy." "No," the voices replied gently. "We are no longer alone." The boy smiled in his room thousands of miles away, then drifted peacefully to sleep. And the fracture lines in the sphere sealed completely. Elias felt tears fall freely now. "You didn't come back for power," he said. "Power distorts resonance. You came back because humanity forgot how to be quiet." He stood slowly. The city above the chamber glowed steadily, no flicker, no instability. Stars outside the valley shifted back into their familiar constellations. Geometry dissolving into ordinary night. Ordinary, except the air across the planet carried faint coherence. Not imposed. Invited. The figure beside him grew more solid. Features sharpening subtly. "Transition phase 1 complete," it said. "Phase 1?" Elias repeated weakly. "Reintroduction. And phase 2, education." He exhaled. "You're going to teach us." "Only those who choose to learn. And me." The figure regarded him carefully. "You remain bridge, but you also remain human. You may leave this valley whenever you wish." He stared at the spiral. "And if I walk away?" "Continuity continues. You are anchor, not prisoner. Freedom. That was the difference between them and Empire's history remembered. They did not conquer. They offered." Elias turned toward the stairway leading upward. Dawn approached, the slow gray light filtering into the city for the first time in over a millennium. He climbed. When he reached the surface, the valley no longer felt isolated. It felt connected. Birds perched along terraces that hadn't existed yesterday. Wind moved naturally, but with tone. He looked back once. The figure stood at the chamber entrance, watching. "Will you return tonight?" it asked. He smiled. "I think the world's going to need a lot of nights." "Duh," the figure inclined its head. "Then we will whisper patiently." Elias began walking toward the edge of the valley. Behind him, the empire that had once posed itself did not rise in conquest. It diffused into breath, into music, into pauses between words. And across America, across the world, millions of people moved through their day with a faint, unexplainable sense that listening mattered more than speaking. They would not know why debates felt slightly calmer, why melodies felt richer, why silence felt less empty. They would not know an ancient civilization had chosen not to rule them, but to remind them. And every night, when the world grew quiet enough, the empire would whisper again, not to command, not to control, but to ask a simple revolutionary question. "Are you listening?" Morning did not end the phenomenon. It hid it. Sunlight filled cities. Traffic resumed. Notifications multiplied, and yet something subtle persisted beneath the noise. People found themselves finishing sentences more slowly. Conversations paused naturally instead of colliding. The effect was so small it could be dismissed as coincidence, until patterns formed at Columbia University. Professor Daniel Harper replayed the melody. He had written at 2:19 a.m. for the 30th time. He had not composed it. It had arrived complete. The intervals were mathematically unfamiliar, not atonal, not traditional harmony. The notes resolved tension without predictable cadence. Like a question answered before it was asked. His graduate student leaned against the piano, frowning. "It shouldn't feel comfortable," she said. "There's no dominant resolution." Harper nodded slowly. "But it does." He pressed the final chord again. Across the room a glass of water vibrated in a perfect circle, not shaking, not rippling randomly. A stable oscillation. Both of them stared. "Okay," she whispered. "That's not Norma." Key didn't disagree. In the valley. Elias watched the sunrise paint the terraces gold. The city did not vanish with daylight. Its soft and eggers lost their glow. Stone blending into the mountain's natural color until distance made it appear like ordinary geology. Anyone flying overhead would see nothing remarkable. The Empire had learned camouflage long before Raida. He hadn't slept. Not from fear. From clarity. Kids. His thoughts felt ordered without effort. As if distractions quietly stepped aside when unnecessary. The figure joined him on the upper terrace. "You feel it," it said. "I feel. Less crowded in my own head. Alignment reduces internal conflict." He looked toward the distant road leading out. "They're starting to notice." "Yes, is that good?" A pause. Awareness brings both curiosity and control. He understood. Curiosity listens. Control interrogates. Humanity would send both. By midday the first online posts appeared. "Did anyone else sleep weirdly well? Mighty nighties stopped last night for like 10 minutes. Music sounds deeper today." Hard to explain, they spread quietly, not viral, not sensational. Too ordinary to alarm, too consistent to ignore. In Washington, the physicist from the monitoring Surreptus Facilitas stared at overlapping reports. Palology, acoustics, psychology, all describing a minor, but synchronized anomaly. She opened a secure channel. "I don't think this is environmental," she said carefully. "I think it's cognitive, but externally coordinated. Silence on the line. You're saying something is influencing perception globally. I'm saying something is stabilizing it." Elias spent the day walking the city. He found no residences in the way modern architecture defined them. No private rooms sealed from others. Spaces curved gently, allowing presence without intrusion. Its privacy achieved through acoustic shadow, rather than walls. "You designed solitude without isolation," he said. "Separation breeds misunderstanding," the figure replied. "Okay, but constant exposure overwhelms. Balance was essential." They entered a long corridor open to the sky. Every footstep produced a soft tone unique to him. Identification. He guessed. Recognition. Each individual contributed distinct resonance. Our society depended on preserving uniqueness, not erasing it. He thought about modern algorithms shaping behavior toward sameness. You solved conformity differently. We prevented it. He stopped walking. That's why you feared returning. The figure inclined its head. Uniform worlds resist harmony. They confuse agreement with sameness that night. Humanity noticed. Not everyone, but enough. In Chicago, a crowded bar fell gradually quieter, not by decision but comfort. Conversations condensed into attentive listening. In rural Kansas, a farmer who paused mid-argument with his brother and suddenly laughed, unable to remember why he'd been angry. In Los Angeles, a sound engineer isolated a background frequency present in every recording made after sunset, not audible, but measurable. He posted it online. Within hours, thousands were analyzing it. The frequency did not remain constant. It adapted to each environment while maintaining relational proportion, like a chord-adjusting key. Without losing identity, Elias returned to the chamber after dark. The spiral glowed steadier than before. No fractures visible. "You're stronger tonight," he said. "Human awareness increases compatibility, and the skeptics import." He blinked. "Important. Doubt prevents blind acceptance. Blind acceptance destroys harmony." He laughed softly. "You really did study us. We studied minds, not cultures. Minds change less." He sat near the basin of memories. "People will come looking," he said. "Yes, double quotes. What should I tell them?" The voices answered together. "Tell the truth." But not all at once. He nodded. Humanity could accept. Wonder gradually. Revelation had to move at the speed of trust. The next morning, helicopters crossed the distant mountains. Not toward the valley. Searching. Patterns. Data had narrowed the region. Elias watched the horizon, strangely calm. "They'll find you eventually. Only if invited." He frowned. "You can hide forever. We can remain unobserved indefinitely, but not undiscovered. Minds will reach us before machines." He realized then. They didn't fear being seen. They feared being misinterpreted. Across the United States, the melody from Columbia spread among musicians. Each played it differently, yet the emotional effect remained identical, a sense of resolution without victory. Comment sections filled with one repeating phrase. "Why does this feel familiar?" Sky, because it wasn't new. It was remembered. Human cognition, recognizing a pattern older than written history, a way of communicating intention beneath language. That night, Elias felt the first direct question from outside, not from the Empire, from a person. A woman sitting alone at her kitchen table in Oregon whispered into empty air, "If something is there, what do you want?" The spiral brightened gently. The voices answered through him, not possessing, not overriding, but borrowing. Key's willingness to speak. He found himself murmuring the response miles away. "We want you to hear each other." The woman felt tears without knowing why. And for the first time in modern history, contact occurred not between species, nor nations, nor technologies, but between eras. Humanity had begun the conversation consciously. Elias looked into the light. "Phase 2?" he said quietly. "Yes," the Empire whispered back. "Now they listen on purpose. Outside, Kit." The world did not panic. It leaned closer, and night, once empty to human awareness, became a time not of silence, but of dialogue. The third night changed everything, not until then. The phenomenon lived at the edge of perception, gentle enough to doubt, strong enough to feel. But curiosity has momentum, and humanity had begun leaning toward it together. At 9:42 p.m. Eastern. Thousands of people across different time zones did the same thing without planning to. They became quiet at once, not because a broadcast told them to, because the day felt complete earlier than expected. Televisions stayed off. The music paused between tracks and wasn't assumed. Conversation slowed into presence rather than exchange. Even animals settled sooner, as if responding to a signal too subtle for instruments but obvious to instinct out in the valley. The spiral brightened to a clarity Elias had not yet seen. "They are participating," the voices said. He stood at the center of the chamber, pulse steady. No instructions, no announcement. Invitation works best when discovered. Above them, the city resonated softly, a low harmonic drifting into the open sky, and this time people heard it not as sound as understanding. A teacher in Vermont closed her lesson plan and instead asked her students a simple question. "What does silence feel like to you?" No one laughed. Each child answered carefully. In Texas, a retired Marine sat on his porch, staring at nothing for 20 minutes, then called his daughter just to listen to her talk. About her day, he didn't know why the urge felt urgent. He just obeyed it. In Seattle, two strangers sharing a late bus ride began speaking slowly, neither interrupting. When they reached their stop, they hesitated, aware they'd experienced something rare. A conversation without defense. The spiral pulsed warmly. Elias felt millions of small moments, not thoughts, not memories, but alignment. Humanity was not being altered, it was being reminded. "You're not adding anything," he realized aloud. "Correct," the Empire replied gently. "We restore balance already possible. But some people still feel nothing. They are not ready tonight. Another night will come." The chamber wall shimmered faintly as if breathing with the planet dot. Then the resistance changed form. Not fear, not control, but a classified meeting convened before dawn in a secure facility outside Denver. Scientists, psychologists, military analysts, all reviewing the same conclusion. A coordinated global cognitive event without identifiable origin. One officer summarized bluntly. "Something is influencing human behavior at scale." The physicist from earlier shook her head. "Influence implies direction. It produces variance, reduction. People become more themselves, not less. Vets worse." Another replied quietly. "Unpredictable populations can't be modeled." Silence followed, because they all sensed the same truth. Nothing was being forced, which meant nothing could be stopped. In the valley, Elias felt the tension ripple through the harmonic field, not damaging, but sharper. "They're analyzing you," he said. "They are protecting their understanding of reality. And if reality expands, then protection becomes adaptation." He sat beside Kit. "The memory basin. You're patient. We had a millennium to practice waiting." Reflections shimmered now, showing modern scenes alongside ancient ones. City streets, living rooms, hospital corridors where nurses paused before entering rooms. Breathing once before speaking. The Empire was learning about humanity as humanity rediscovered listening. At midnight local time across multiple regions. The first coordinated attempt occurred. No government ordered it, or no organization planned it. Yet tens of thousands of people, strangers to each other, simply stepped outside and stood quietly beneath the sky. The harmonic field intensified gently. Elias felt it like standing inside a heartbeat shared by countenance. "What happens if everyone does this?" he asked. The voices answered softly. "Then we will no longer whisper." He looked up sharply. "You'll speak, nod louder." The spiral expanded, light filling the chamber without glare. Clearer, for the first time. Words formed distinctly in human awareness everywhere. Not heard by ears. Understood directly. A single message. identical yet personal to each. Mind, you were never meant to live alone inside your thoughts, people. Didn't panic, they cried. Not from fear. From recognition, the statement felt remembered rather than delivered. Across cities, phones lit up with messages sent simultaneously. Did you just feel that? Yes. They all had. Elias staggered slightly as the resonance passed through him. And outward, you crossed the threshold. They invited it. And now dialogue replaces guessing. He sensed countless questions forming across the world, cautious but sincere. Are you alive? What are you? Why us? Empire responded, not with speeches but impressions. Reassurance without dominance. Presence without authority. The distinction mattered in the Denver facility. Manidas recorded an unprecedented neurological event, synchronized calm across massive populations, no command center, no transmitter. One analyst whispered what none wanted to conclude. We're not observing a signal. He stared at the data. We're observing communication. Elias stepped closer to the Spyro. You could change everything. We could help you change yourselves. Same difference to history books. History measures events. Continuity measures. Understanding. He smiled faintly. You're going to make philosophers very busy. They have been preparing unknowingly. As dawn approached again, the harmonic glow softened. The Empire withdrew slightly, not leaving, but allowing autonomy to return fully. The world resumed motion. Traffic, news, routine. Yet something remained. People spoke less automatically. Pauses gained value, and every night afterward. More would step into quiet intentionally. Not because they were told, because they had felt. Conversation beyond words. Elias climbed to the terrace overlooking the valley. What happens when everyone can hear you clearly? The figure stood beside him, almost fully human now. Then we stop being mysterious and start being neighbors, the gentle warmth answered. Yes, he watched sunlight spill over mountains, touching both ancient stone and modern world beyond. Humanity had not discovered aliens, nor spirits, nor lost technology. It had rediscovered a forgotten possibility. Civilization can grow not by speaking louder, but by learning to listen together. And the empire that once whispered at night was slowly becoming something new, not rulers, not legends, but companions, in the long conversation of being human.